Welcome to Vineyard Hopkinton. As we follow Jesus together, we experience the Holy Spirit, create a multicultural community, and pursue kingdom of God justice.
You know, when was the last time you made a decision and you immediately wished that you had a do-over? Can you think of one? Hopefully, the one that you're thinking of is like super small, and you're like, yeah, I went to the ice cream truck, and I got the strawberry instead of the chocolate, and I really wished I would have gotten the chocolate. Hopefully it's like a really tiny thing that looking back, you're like, it wasn't so bad, right? But maybe it was a little bit bigger, and you look back and you're like, all the clues pointed to not choosing that. There were all the warning signs, and yet what did I do? I still made the wrong choice. We've all probably made the wrong decision once or twice in our life, right? I was thinking about this, and I have so many different stories that I could throw out of decisions that I made incorrectly. I think one of them was a job promotion that I took. You ever taken a promotion and been like, man, that was really the wrong life choice? I was 21 or 22. My boss got promoted, and so she offered me her job. So it was managing at a credit union. And I was like, this is awesome. I'm like 21, like all this responsibility, it's gonna be great. They're paying me so much. They paid me like barely nothing more than what I was already making. I should have paid attention to the signs in this equation. And so after I sign everything, like step into that role, about 3 days later, my boss is like, here, come to my office. I'm like, okay. She's like, so we're gonna change how we do pay structure here in the entire credit union. So your first big task is that you have to get all of your employees. It's the busiest branch with the most employees, like 10 to 15. And you have to get all of them at the appropriate pay structure within 6 months. Otherwise, their salaries all get cut. And I looked at her, I was like, really? The people I managed had worked there as long as I had been alive. Like, it was bad news. The thing you don't want to do as a 22-year-old is tell people 3 times your age that you're cutting their salary. It did not go over very well. I did not have the skills or experience to do what I was doing. And I wanted to do over really, really bad. Have you ever had moments like that in your life? You know, today as we continue our series, Power Fails in Trusting God, we're going to be in 1 Samuel chapter 8, and the story here is simple. Let me lay it out. Samuel, who used to be the little boy who heard God speak, is now the almost elderly man who's been leading Israel for like multiple decades, 40, 50, 60 years. And he wants to hand over leadership of Israel to his kids. So he starts to promote them and to give them this role. And the Israelites say, no way. We don't want your sons to be in charge of us. And they say, it's this decision so bad that we want a king because everybody else has one. And Samuel is heartbroken. And so he goes to God and he prays and he brings this before God, and God says, you know what, Samuel, give them what they want. But let's make sure that they know what they're getting in the deal and what it is that they're giving up. The Israelites chose to go for a king, ignoring all the warning signs that we're going to see that God lays out here for them. And the question kind of is in it, like, why does God care so much if they have a king versus having a judge or whatever the title was that they have? And it's a 3-part answer. Here it is. I'll give you the Cliff's Notes answer at the very beginning. It's because God cares because they already had a king. God cares because they didn't trust the king that they had. And God cares because he was their king. Israel thought that their king was going to be more trustworthy than God, which in hindsight is a very bad life choice. So let's read 1 Samuel 8 and see what's going on in this. As Samuel grew old, he appointed his sons to be judges over Israel, but they were not like their father. They were greedy for money, and they accepted bribes and perverted justice. And finally, all the elders of Israel met to discuss the matter with Samuel. Look, you're old and your sons are not like you. Give us a king to judge us like all the other nations. And Samuel was displeased with their request and went to the Lord for guidance. Do everything that they say to you, the Lord replied. If they're rejecting me, not you, they don't want me to be their king any longer. Ever since I brought them from Egypt, they've continually abandoned me and followed other gods. And now they're giving you the same treatment. So do as they ask, but warn them about the way that a king will reign over them. So Samuel passed on the Lord's warning to the people who were asking him for a king. This is how the king will reign over you. The king will draft your sons and assign them to his chariots. Some will be generals and captains in his army. Others will be forced to plow in his fields and harvest his crops. Some will make his weapons and his equipment. The king will take your daughters from you and force them to cook and bake and make perfumes for him. That's a very specific one. I just chuckle at, like, make perfumes. Okay. He will take away the best of your fields and vineyards and olive groves and give them to his own officials. He'll take 1/10 of your grain and your grapes and distribute it among his officers and attendants. He will take your male and female slaves and demand the finest of your cattle and donkeys for his own use. He will demand 1/10 of your flocks, and you will be his slaves. When that day comes, you will beg for relief from this king that you are demanding, but then the Lord will not help you. But the people refused to listen to Samuel's warning. Even so, we want a king. We want to be like the nations around us. Our king will judge us and lead us into battle. So Samuel repeated to the Lord what they had said, and the Lord said, do as they say, give them a king. And Samuel agreed and sent the people home. You know, in every bad decision, hindsight gives us lots of warning signs, right? So let's talk about all the warning signs that they just were given here. And the first one is their reasoning for wanting a king. They said, you're old, your sons are bad, so give us a king. This is both a them issue and a him issue. Both sides have a problem going on here. Them, have a problem because they don't get a free pass just because he made a bad choice. Walking away from the leader, who's Samuel, that God has given them, was a terrible decision. And there's a warning that's given to those of us that follow, right? Those of us who aren't leading, that we need to follow the godly leaders that God has placed over us. Samuel was making a mistake, but you know what? He was still there. He hadn't disappeared yet. They're treating him like he's dead and gone. That's not actually what's happened. They still had time. Talk over the situation. Don't demand this half thought out thing and not pray over it, but invite God into the process. You know, friends, if God hasn't released me from following the leader that he's placed me under, then my job is to follow them well. Do you know what that looks like? Looks like submission. If God tells you to, it means calling them out. That's probably what Samuel actually needed. It means encouraging them, and it means praying for them. We have a role in this, but he also had a role in this, right? He had to be accountable because he, Samuel, shouldn't have placed his kids in leadership roles just because they were his kids. And honestly, churches do this all the time. And as a pastor's kid, it drives me crazy because it's not usually the right decision. Character matters more than genes. Character matters more than genes. And the warning to those of us who lead is that we have to pay attention to the character of the people that we're promoting. My character, my personality, the trust built up in me does not cover them. They need to work on their own character. I can't just promote somebody because I like them and be like, well, they'll figure it out at some point, and I'll just cover them just in case. That doesn't work. They have to be actively doing it themselves. Character matters in all of us, and especially in our leaders. That's the first warning sign. The second is that they wanted a leader just like everybody else. You know, the church has done this. Followers of Jesus have done this in every single era of the church, of creation, really. Here, it's Samuel versus Samuel's sons versus the king that they wanted. 1,200 years later, Paul writes about another instance. You know, you're jealous of one another and you quarrel with each other. Doesn't that prove that you're controlled by your sinful nature? Aren't you living like people of the world? When one of you says, I'm a follower of Paul, and another says, I follow Apollos, aren't you just acting like the people of the world? For Paul, it was Paul, Apollos. You could add Peter, he does it a different instance, even John. Everybody wants to claim that they're following the right leader, the right apostle. They want to argue over who's the best one. And you know what? 2,000 years later, we still do the same thing. And I think we've even perfected this foolishness. Celebrity Christian culture is the most gross thing that we have created. And we have embraced it fully. We have hugged it so tight that it's all that we even know. Christians in America are desperate to have famous people leading them. Please, Jesus, do not make me famous. That's what people should be saying. I don't want that. No interest. Following Jesus as a famous person sounds terrible to me. Like, that is not how I want to live. But we're obsessed with it. Carl Vaders is a pastor and an author, and he wrote, "The root of celebrity is to celebrate, and we imitate what we celebrate. When we elevate leaders through their ability to become celebrities, what we're doing is we're giving them power while having no genuine proximity to our lives. When you have power but no proximity, you have little to no accountability. And power without accountability always leads to an us and them dynamic." Let me push at this a little bit more. There's another author named Caitlin Beatty, and she says this: I think what's important for Christians to think about is the lack of proximity. The social power when you're standing on a stage and you have thousands of people listening to you, and behind closed doors, very few people actually know who you are and what your daily life is like. It's a problem. In that distance and isolation come all sorts of problems. You know, friends, celebrity culture idolizes leaders at the expense, I think, of worshiping God. Celebrity culture thrives on what this other person has said and done at the expense of what God's actually doing in our lives. Celebrity culture creates leaders who thrive in privacy with little to no accountability, instead of promoting leaders and calling them to live with the people that they're called to lead and to learn the hard task of living with vulnerability. The reason that this matters is because celebrity culture is the opposite of how God is king. God does not lead in that same way. He's a king who is near. He has power, but he chose vulnerability through the cross in the person of Jesus. He could choose to be distant and separated and surrounded, kind of walled off from us. But in John 15:15, it says that I no longer call you slaves because a master doesn't confide in his slaves. Now you are my friends, since I've told you everything that the Father told me. What we're being invited into, what we're being called towards in this story is to value the vulnerability of Jesus and to reject celebrity worship in any form. Here's the third warning. It's demanding that God obeys you. When God says, do as they say and give them a king, you know what the Israelites who were demanding should have done? They should have hightailed it. They should have been like, actually, we're good, thank you. Like, we're walking away. Like, I don't want that. If God's saying just do whatever they say, that is not going to be a comfortable ending for you. It's not going to go well. You know, here's the irony. I don't know if you know this, but in Deuteronomy 17, which was written, let's say 500 years before this, somewhere around that. If you read the section, Deuteronomy 17, God says that he's going to give Israel a king. He had already said that this was going to happen. But what he did in Deuteronomy 17 is he laid out, when you have a king, this is how to hold them accountable. When you have a king, this is how they should engage with me. When you have a king, this is how they should live. If the Israelites would have done the Deuteronomy 17 way, I think this whole thing would have gone a lot differently. I think their history probably would have changed. I think things would have looked different for them. But what did they do? They forced it. And I think it's because, honestly, they wanted to be in control. And so they had this conversation in their heads that goes like one pastor kind of hypothesized. It's all well and good to have God there like a safety net. We certainly don't want to tick him off so that he sends us to hell, but we do have bills to pay. We have enemies who want to hurt us, social issues to deal with. So we need something more secure than an invisible God whose location is unknown half the time. We need somebody we can actually depend on. Essentially, God, we don't trust you to do what we think we need, so we're just going to put somebody in that role that does. Now, why does God give in to them? You ever look at some of the times that God allows people to get what they asked for, and you're like, man, that was rough. Like, why does he do it? If you or I were making his decisions, we probably wouldn't. For the parents in the room, when your kids want to make stupid decisions and they're under 18, do you let them make all the stupid decisions? No, you do not, right? And this is the reasoning. You say, like, I know that that's not going to be a good decision for you. Like, I've lived longer, I've seen more. That's not going to take you to a good spot. So I'm going to help you by choosing to not allow you to go down that road right now. When you turn 18, you can make all the stupid decisions you want. But for now, I'm going to help you. Why does God not do that? You know, the Bible shows us time and time again that sometimes God says yes to our demands to let us learn the lessons that we need to learn from the demands that we're making of him. Sometimes he gives us what we ask for, not because it's right, but because we're stubborn enough that he knows the only way that he can help us is by giving us what it is that we're demanding. And so he does that for Israel, and he gives them this king named Saul, who was smart, and he was a good leader and wealthy, and they said he was good looking and taller than everybody else, because those things all matter in politics, right? That's what we look for. But you know what else he was? A scared fool with serious character issues. The Israelites wanted a king who was going to guarantee prosperity for them. That did not happen. They wanted a king who they could control. Instead, he ended up controlling them and leading them all sorts of places that didn't end up well. And this is why, because all kings do is take. And that's the fourth warning sign we have here. Verses 10 through 18 give us this list, this laundry list of how kings are going to upend your life in ways that you're not happy about. Let me tell you about it. He's going to take your sons and put them in deadly situations just because. He's going to force them to work for him instead of being able to work for themselves. He's going to take your daughters as servants, wives, and worse. He'll take the land that's been in your family for years, and he's going to discard it or just add it to his own. He'll take what you've stored up for the rest of the year, what you needed to make it, and he's not going to replace it. He's going to take the tools that you need, and then he'll still require you to do the same amount of work without the good tools. He'll know that you're struggling, and he'll refuse to help. Do you still want this? Is this what you still want, guys? You know why he keeps giving all these warnings? Because there's another option, right? They had another king they could choose. There's a king who won't take, and Israel already had him as king. Let me read a parable from Jesus to you. Matthew 20, verses 1 through 16. This is how God leads. For the kingdom of heaven is like the landowner who went out early one morning to hire workers for his vineyard. And he agreed to pay the normal daily wage and send them out to work. At 9 a.m., he saw some people standing around doing nothing, so he hired them too, telling them he would pay them whatever was right at the end of the day. Then he does the same thing at noon, and again at 3, and then at 5. And he says, go join the people who are working. And that evening he paid them starting with the last workers first. So he goes through each time slot, each shift, and he gets to the ones who were hired first. And it says, when those hired first came to get their pay, they assumed that they would get more, but they too were paid a day's wage. When they received their pay, they protested. Those people only worked 1 hour, and you paid them just as much as us who worked all day in the scorching heat. He said, friend, I haven't been unfair. Didn't you agree to work all day for this wage? So take your money and go. I wanted to pay the last worker the same as you. Is it against the law for me to do what I want with my money? Should you be jealous because I am kind to others? Should you be jealous because I am kind? Jesus gives this parable to show us how the kingdom of God works. When we choose to follow Jesus, what we're doing is pledging allegiance to a king who is in control. And that king is Jesus. And what he's saying here is that he pledges to be generous to all of us, even those of us who put nothing into the system. And you know what? That's good news for all of us, because you and I don't put anything into the system. We're not paying in. He's just giving out. Jesus is the king who is so kind that if you follow him long enough in community, you know what's going to happen? You're going to see him being kind to the person sitting next to you, and you're going to look at it and you're going to be like, that was stupid, but it doesn't matter because he wants to, because that's who he is. Jesus is the king who thinks of things so differently from any other king and leader. Because guess what? Father, Son, and Holy Spirit have a plan for eternity, for all of time, beginning to end. And the best leaders in our world have a 20-year plan. It's a bit different. A pretty huge amount different when you look at it that way. Earthly kings make promises because they want to stay in control. Jesus makes promises because he is in control, and he has no fear of losing power. He's so confident in his kingship that guess what? He gave it all up for us. That's the good news of Jesus as king. And it all at the end of the day comes down to trust. We're not choosing Jesus as king over our country like the Israelites were, but we are choosing him as king over our lives. And the reason that we choose other kings, even when we've seen all the warning signs, is because honestly, we look at God and we say, I don't really trust you. The question for us this morning is, are you willing to trust? Because we all have kings. And kings, what they do is they make their subjects into servants or slaves. Apostle Paul says it this way in Galatians. Before you knew God, you were slaves to so-called gods that do not even exist. So now that you know God, or should I say now that God knows you, do you want to go back to again and become slaves once more to the weak and the useless spiritual principles of this world? We all have a king. Is yours Jesus?